Let's rock and roll. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Tuesday, January 14th, 2014, the agenda for the Public Works Committee. Brenda, can we do a roll call and determination of quorum? Here.
Roberts. Here. Scott. Here. Clayton. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Brenda. Now we'll do the adoption of the agenda. Is there anyone that needs? I have a motion by Alderwoman Scott and a second by Alderman Roberts to adopt the agenda. That moved and seconded. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed. Now is the time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the committee on any issue not limited to items on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except for by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the alderman present. Is there any items that we do not have on the agenda that someone wants to speak to? Not on the agenda. And I just also, while we're still kind of getting things put in place here, is just a reminder that please turn your cell phones to vibrate or the off position, and if you need to make a phone call or receive a phone call, would you take that out in the hallway? Thank you. Now we'll move on to consent items 1 through 18. And again, I do not have any speaker comments on items 1 through 18. Is there any? This will be 19. Is there any member wishing to pull an item from items 1 through 18? Staff, is there anything that needs to come up? Not seeing any lights. We will move on to adopting items 1 through 18 in one vote. So moved by Roberts, second by Estes. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Item number 19 is our non-consent items on the agenda, and I'm looking for items for public comment, and I do have one item on item number 19. Mr. Udiger, Tom Udiger, I saw him someplace. There he is. I have you requesting to speak on item number 19. If you care, you certainly may, and if you like, you can come to the podium. And I just want to remind you, Mr. Udiger, the public comment period is open for 3 minutes per speaker, so we'll run the time for you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman
Welcome.
Nordstrom. Well, I'm not sure of the situation today. I have been informed by the state DNR office that my request for a waiver for the hookup to the central sewer system has been denied, and they've required that I do hook up to the central service system. And I would imagine that then takes care of the issue. I mean, does it take that? Does it take it out of your hands? The request from the state office, does that eliminate your involvement in this?
Thank you for the question. I can certainly ask our legal counsel to verify that, but I'm going to say no at this time. It doesn't. Joel, if you can kind of answer
well,
that.
We can't overrule the state DNR determination. So if they're saying he needs to hook up to the sewer system and can't do a septic system, then yes, we are bound by that decision.
Thank you, Joel. I didn't think so. But anyway, hopefully that addresses your question. It may not be the one you like or prefer, but Sorry.
No.
I do have a question from Alderman Clayton here for you. If you like, Mr. Clayton, you have the floor.
And I'm sorry, and forgive my informality, but Tom, what I'd like to do is, Dale, could you weigh in, please, and kind of, the last time we spoke about this, there was a requirement for the Utigers to have an inspection hole dug, and then that was going to be a determining factor based on what was found, through that hole. So if you don't mind bringing us up to speed where we are, what decisions have been made, and then how those decisions affect them as a user and us as the city.
Yes, I'll do my best to, I guess, paraphrase the attachments that were there. Mr. Udiger was able to find a contractor to dig a soil profile test hole on his property. As I understand it, I think there was one, if not two, geologists from the South Dakota Geological Survey, which are state employees. There were no city employees present at the time that inspection was done. I believe their report is attached to the agenda, but more or less the findings were that it was bedrock, right, where the profile hole was. They passed that information on to the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. They reviewed the information and made their determination that that's not a viable place to install a septic system. Therefore, they have to follow state law and hook up to the sewer system that fronts their property.
And if you don't mind, Dale, from an engineering perspective, but in language we can understand, could you explain why it's not a good idea to have a septic system in the bedrock?
Yes, the septic systems have two components: the septic tank typically, and then the drain field. The septic tank removes the solids and does some anaerobic type treatment of the waste going into it. And then the effluent that comes out of your tank then goes into a drain field. Well, the drain field also treats the water as it goes out, but you need a soil profile below your drain field. If it's bedrock, you don't have that profile. Therefore, the bacterial treatment of that effluent coming out of your tank or water coming out of your tank, it doesn't happen. So then that effluent goes straight into the aquifer. It runs straight into the rocks. It's all limestone rock there. Goes right into the aquifer without treatment. That's the reasoning why you need to have a soil profile below your drain field for it to function properly.
Okay, so if I can paraphrase and tell me if I'm close here, because I'm learning as I go as well. So if in fact it's bedrock, then you would have a liquid effluent that would flow through cracks basically untreated. If it were a sandy soil or whatever the appropriate type of soil is, there'd be a filtering mechanism to slow the water's travel or the effluent's travel and filter it at the same time.
It's not a filtering, it's a zone for biological treatment, if you will. It's not much different than how the wastewater treatment plant treats the effluent. First they remove the solids, and then they go through a number of biological treatments to clean the water. And the soil does the same thing in a septic system. It reduces the yuckies, if you will, in the water. It just doesn't filter them out. There's actually a biological process that occurs in the soil profile below the drain field that cleans the water.
Okay, so we have bedrock and soil, and I know it's probably more complicated than that, but there could be good soil and soil that's not conducive to a good drain field.
Yes, in fact, a sandy soil is not good because you don't have that retention time. If you have a sandy soil or soils that percolate too quickly, you've got to really increase the size of your drain field to be able to disperse that water enough where it's going to get the treatment instead of overloading the soil and having the water drain through it too fast.
Okay, and then lastly, and then I'll yield the floor. The septic system and the drain field would have to be on the owner's property. So in this case, the Utigers have to have it within their property lines, and it's my. Let me say it as a question. And there is no place on their property within their property boundaries that would have a different profile that would be conducive to a drain field and a tank.
Based on what the geologists saw when they were out there, I don't believe that there's an alternate location on the Utigers' property to install a system that would meet state requirements.
Okay. And then this started out as, did I have questions for you? And Tom, based on all this conversation, and I'm not trying to take this away from the chairman at all, but if there's something further that you have to offer based on this conversation, I'm certainly willing to listen.
Well, I guess I have nothing further to direct towards the immediate issue, other than I would, I guess, ask in lieu of being granted a building permit to repair my present system, I would ask the Public Works Committee to consider a waiver for the hookup fee because of the extremely high cost of construction in putting in a hookup for my property.
If I may, Mr. Udiger, I've got a couple of other lights here, but you do have a couple of options in front of you. Is that before you get to that stage, right now we're discussing the point of your request, and we're trying to make a decision at this point in time in the process to see if you want to go forward with that request, or you want to pull that request for appeal, or we have the option to deny that request, and then at that decision point, then we can ascertain what your situation can be for addressing your question that you just made currently about the waiving the fees. So if I can do one thing at a time, I'll kind of slow this
Fine.
down and make sure we're procedurally correct.
Sure.
Okay. So do you want to pull your request for
Yes.
appeal? Okay. So we will need to acknowledge that you're, from this committee, we need to acknowledge that you're pulling your request to appeal. I will entertain that motion. If I may, just 1 second. Dale, do you have anything to add to this? This point, at this point, okay. Alderman Estes.
I'll make
A motion by Estes, second by Clayton to acknowledge the withdrawal for the appeal of the request from Tom Udiger for waiver of regulations to repair or replace the septic system located at 3618 Ridge Drive. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed. Mr. Udiger, you're now to your question that you have on hand regarding the waiver. We'll have to look to staff to weigh in on this conversation at this point, and at this time I would like to recognize Dale Tech.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'd like to give a little background on the project. The project in this area to install the sanitary sewer was done through an EPA grant. I believe they funded 55% of the project. The city had to come up with the other 45%. Throughout the project evolution, meeting with property owners, we had a number of public meetings. The cost to hook up was a huge concern to the people that were affected by this project. Based on that, in previous council actions, the previous council capped the hookup fee at about $7,500. The actual costs, I think, where we were going to compute what the true costs were that the city spent on it that would have been recaptured by the people that hook up were probably in the $13,000 to $15,000 range. So the city has already, if you will, subsidized this about 50%. So just wanted to throw that out there, and that's the only information that I have regarding the costs that I can share with you at this time. Certainly, Mr. Udiger's request is something that probably needs further discussion. I'd be happy to, I guess, present to you in another format, if you will, or if you have other questions about how we got to where we were today and how the hookup fees were determined, I'd be happy to do that. But in a nutshell, that's kind of what happened.
Thank you, Dale. We'll recognize Alderman Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dale, if you don't mind, Mr. Udiger was forthright in bringing us pictures and explain the blasting process that took place in order to put that city line in there. Were there any other folks in that neighborhood who have as dire a circumstance in an effort to get their lines from their homes out to that city line?
I would assume that there are. I don't know of anyone that specifically had issues hooking up. There are a number of people that have hooked up already. I don't know what they went through to actually connect. I don't know how difficult or how easy it was for them to connect. I would assume, since the geology of the area is fairly consistent, that they're all about the same, but that would be an assumption on my behalf. But I don't have firsthand knowledge of knowing the ease or difficulty that any of the other people had in hooking up their service lines.
Okay. Mr. Chair, can I address a question to Mr. Uterger then?
Please.
Tom, if you don't mind, I mean, the fact that you've lived there and have lived there for years, and certainly you were witness to all the blasting that took place when the main line was put in, have you seen from your perspective other neighbors who may have in fact over the years hooked up? Was there further blasting and whatnot that went on that turned it into more of an excavation, a mining type excavation, in order to get them hooked up? I'm just wondering if your situation is unique in any respect in terms of the cost and the trouble to get you hooked up to the city system.
Well, I believe our situation is unique. We live on the very south end of the project, and the rock outcropping in that area, just to the south of me, does have an outcropping. The further north we go, the more, I think, the more of a mixed soil condition exists. And so I think on the very south end, there are 2 or 3 properties of us that I think have the highest incidence of rock formation.
Okay, thank you. I'll yield the floor, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more lights, but if I can ask a question of the staff, I just want to make sure we're giving all the options available that can be known, to be known, and whoever wants to jump in from the staff side is allowing a precedence like this. We do have precedents on the books that allow citizens to come forward and ask for a waiver of request, correct? Do I understand that? And you will recognize City Engineer Dale Tech.
I'm sure that somebody has come from time to time to request a waiver or a reduction in those fees. One doesn't specifically come to mind. These fees were set by resolution, so I just want to point that out, that you'd be, I guess, making a change of the resolution. Maybe that's a legal question that our city attorney's office would be better equipped to handle.
Thank you. Before I go to the city attorney's office, if I may recognize Alderman Estes.
Thank you, Chairman Nordstrom. As I understand, this project was because we have non-conforming sewers in the area. No?
No, we have no sewers in the area. The purpose for this project was the result of a source water protection study that was done in 2007, I think, and talking about the safety and viability of our water aquifers, and not only ours for the city. I mean, we utilize the Madison Aquifer for a good part of our water supply, but there are numerous private wells in that very same aquifer. So through the study process, through the analysis done by the consultant, by the USGS, and previous actions of the council, it was decided that our aquifer is very important to the entire community. We need to do what's best to protect it. Also, the EPA, we were able to, through this process, obtain the grants to be able to subsidize these projects by 55%. So no, it's not a non-conforming thing. It's a source water protection issue that we're talking about.
May I ask him another one?
Please.
Is Mr. Uterger is this the final service that's,
No, there are a number, I don't even have the numbers, but there are a number of people that aren't hooked up to this sewer system. As part of the policy discussion, the fee discussion that was had on this project, it was determined that until you have a problem with your septic system, you can continue to use it. We're not going to just go in there and say, everyone, you've got to hook up now. It's until they have an issue with their septic system is what drives the connection to the main that was installed.
all right, thank you. I guess, so this, what I was wanting to say is a little bit different, but I feel a little bit uncomfortable trying to decide as a committee or as we sit here to try to figure out whose service line is more expensive and who's under more duress than the next guy. And what really made me think about that is that I know that the Public Works and the City Engineering Department just hired an engineer to put together, I think, 10 projects within the city that for non-conforming sewers. And the city's putting it together all, going to go tear up all these streets and stuff, but then it's up to each resident to pay, a portion of these projects plus their own service line. And I was just worried that if we get into the set of precedents here that says, well, if somebody's service line is more difficult than the next person's, what kind of a Pandora's box we open up here with these other 10 projects, and maybe they don't have any, maybe there's no similarities here, but I guess I'm just not sure that we're suited here to sit unless we go out on a field trip and decide whose project is harder and whose fees we abate. Thanks.
Let me go to the city engineer, Dale Tech.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could maybe address that slightly. As I recall from the discussions about the hookup fee being reduced and then capped, that was part of the concern was you've got all these people that are going to have a fairly large expense on their service lines. Let's do what we can to reduce the hookup fee to help them out a little bit. It certainly wasn't on a case-by-case basis where they said this landowner's going to, their service line is going to be double what theirs is. It was to help the area as a whole.
Thank you. And again, just to refresh everyone, it's $7,500, correct?
Hookup fee, correct.
Hookup
yes.
fees. Thank you. And I believe I'll have one more question for you, Dale, but let me address a question to Joel Landine, City Attorney Landine. Do you have any comments to make about the resolution that was been adopted in the past?
Well, I mean, a resolution can be changed by another resolution, essentially reversing that action. But, I get a little more leery when you're starting to talk about hookup fees or things like that, where other people are also paying a fee. I think you have an obligation. I know when you're talking about an assessed project that the fee has to be equal, that you can't charge certain people more. I mean, there's legal concerns with that, equal protection, that certain people, you're supposed to base it on the benefit to be received. I haven't done the research on a hookup fee situation, but I think you at the very least would create potential problems because you are going to have other people out there who are hooking up in the future who may have similar issues and are probably going to come in and then ask for the same consideration. And while it may not be a legally binding precedent, it's certainly hard for you to tell somebody else no if you've already said yes. And if I had installed my line and it had cost more and I heard about this, I may come in and say, hey, I need some consideration too. Now, if you feel that because of the cost that the consideration should be given, that's certainly within your prerogative. But I would urge you to do whatever you do fairly. And I would also go back to the point that some of this was already taken into consideration when the fee was itself set, in that we didn't seek full reimbursement for the cost of that, based on the fact that we recognized there probably wasn't going to be a significant cost in actually connecting them to the lines.
I believe that answers my question that I was anticipating for Dale Tech as well. The chair will entertain a motion at this time, or if we need to have further discussion, Alderwoman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to acknowledge this discussion and leave it at that.
Motion made by Alderwoman Scott and second by Roberts to acknowledge the discussion. Is there any other discussion on this? Seeing none, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed. Thank you for the time, Mr. Udiger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And good luck with your future progress.
Thank you.
And connections. Item number 20 is recognition of traffic operations employees for the Jackson Boulevard project. Todd Seaman, Region Engineer for the South Dakota Department of Transportation. Chair will recognize, is it Ms.? No?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Tom Horan. Todd Seaman has been asked to take care of some legislative issues over the course of the next month, so I'm your second string Todd Seaman. For those of you who have been in public service, whether as employees or in the positions that you're in, you certainly understand that it is very seldom that there's a thank you made publicly for the work that you do. Oftentimes, no words at all mean that you're doing your job properly. Well, there are three individuals that the state of South Dakota Department of Transportation would like to recognize. They are City of Rapid City employees. They work within the Traffic Operations Center. And let me just give you a very quick background of specifically why we would like to thank these individuals. They're seated humbly in the back of the room. At least for now, I won't ask them to come up here. They do their jobs humbly. They do it well. These individuals take care of traffic signals within the City of Rapid City. The Department of Transportation, we do considerable planning when we put projects together. We may plan to put up temporary traffic signals. We may plan to alter the timing at certain intersections to accommodate where we think traffic might flow during construction. And it's a little bit like trying to control water, you know, that once you put up the barricades and the barrels that people are just going to look for another way to go. And all three of these individuals have proven in the past that they will take responsibility for all of the traffic signals and just trying to keep traffic moving very smoothly within their community, regardless of whether it's a Department of Transportation project or a City of Rapid City project. And so because of that, and I won't belabor it anymore, if I could ask these individuals to come up, they are John Less, Mike Peterson, and Mike Wolf. We've prepared some plaques just simply thanking them for all the efforts that they do. They do their jobs in a very responsible fashion and a very responsive fashion. So thank you, gentlemen.
Don't get to.
Dang it.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
And I don't have anything else.
Todd, just want to thank you for doing this, and I do have a question or a comment from Alderman Estes. And before the staff, oh, they're going to sit down. Okay. All right. Very good. Before they get away, I need to acknowledge them too. Thank you. Alderman Estes.
Thank you. I just want to thank you guys for your work, and the projects seem to me go really smooth. I was just wondering if you guys have a remote control that I could get from you, so as going through town that I can kind of just manipulate the lights. Yeah, I don't need a siren. I would just like to really, you know, just if you got one of those gadgets, I'd like to
Only
like
staff
one for
gets
Christmas
those.
if I could, please. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments, Alderman Estes. I'll recognize, the chair now recognizes Alderman Clayton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You know, John, we see you often here here in Public Works and also council meetings, so you're a familiar face. Mike, you know, when I look back there and I see two guys dressed like bumblebees, I know that means that you're out there in harm's way. So from me to you, a heartfelt thanks, because standing out there, and it's hard enough being in traffic when you got two tons of metal wrapped around you, but when you guys are standing out there with nothing to protect you more than those yellow coats, and you're hoping somebody doesn't run over you, it's difficult when you got, part of your brain on what you're doing and part of your brain on survival. So I really thank you for what you do, because I know you're out there in awful conditions all the time, and cars who would rather run over you than wait for just a minute, for their turn. So thanks again for what you do and for keeping our city safe for all of us who travel the streets.
Thank you. Alderwoman Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to acknowledge the awards for the employees.
Indeed, that's very appropriate motion. Motion's been made and second to acknowledge the awards presented to John Less, Mike Peterson, and Mike Wolf. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed. Let me say, gentlemen, if I may, is that to our staff, thank you very much for the jobs that you were out there in the weather and all kinds of climate. I've seen you guys up on those cherry pickers, if you will, to change and most times I'm reporting a red light that's out or something along that line. And then also fixing the street lighting as well, or involved with the fixing of the street lights. I know you don't do that directly all the time, but you're involved with that. So I want to thank you for that and your efforts, and also establishing and continuing a good PR with the public out there, because I know there's some citizens who will drive by you and have some unofficial comments for you. So thank you, gentlemen, for that. For that endurance, and again, thank you for all the work you're doing. And Mr. Herron, for pulling off second string, you did an excellent job for us, and please acknowledge that for us, to Todd Seaman, we thank you very much for the awards presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Certainly. Alderman Clayton.
I just want to leave you guys with something. I think it's kind of cute, and since we don't have the police department represented, I can say it. There's an old joke in Rapid City. Do you know how you can tell the locals in Rapid City? They're the third one through on the red light. So, and I'll yield. Thanks.
The next item on the agenda is item 21. Authorize the mayor and finance. Authorize the mayor and finance officer to sign an amendment to the golf course food and beverage concession agreement. And before I go to the committee, Mr. Bigler, can you update us a little bit on your conversations with the staff, your department, and Chop House, and et cetera, the Golf Course Association?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. At the last city council meeting, we were requested to set up a meeting with representatives from the various golf associations that utilize Meadowbrook as their home course, and with the concessionaires, Mike and Carmen Derby. We did that on Friday, this past Friday. Alderman Estes was there, city staff, representatives from the Men's Association, the Women's Association, and the Derbies. We had what I thought was a very good discussion, a very frank discussion of some of the issues that were of concern from both the Men's and Women's Association, and they had some constructive observations for the concessionaires. Yesterday I received, actually later on in the day and Friday, we received notice from the Derbies that they were not going to be seeking this amendment to their lease agreement for the Meadowbrook Pub and Grill. Yesterday we received the letter from the Derbies, which is attached to this agenda item for you to read. And they cited as reasons for not pursuing this amendment and therefore terminating the lease some additional commitments that have come up with them over the last couple of months, as well as a loss of general manager and then some other factors. So at this point, we will be going out for a new RFP to establish food and beverage service out there at the golf course.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize Alderman Estes.
Thank you, Chairman Nordstrom. I'll make a motion to acknowledge the letter received by the Derbies withdrawing their interest in being the concessionaire, and part B would be to authorize staff to prepare another RFP to find a new concessionaire.
Motion's been made and seconded by Alderman Clayton to proceed, number one is to acknowledge the letter to discontinue the agreement with the city by the Derbies, and the next one is, part B, is to authorize staff to go out for another RFP. I do have a light here. Alderman Clayton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Jeff, if you don't mind, one of the criticisms, if you will, that we heard in past presentations from the golfers in particular was that perhaps it was too fancy or high-priced a menu. Based on conversations with those people who utilize the golf courses, was there any direction in terms of their desires that it be more of a snack bar type thing? I mean, I guess I'm wondering what we're going to be looking at as we look into the future in terms of maybe changing the complexion of the facility somewhat.
Well, that was one of the suggestions that came up from the Men's Association, that they would, or at least those that were there expressing the opinion, was that they were looking for something a little less formal, perhaps, than a full restaurant menu fare. The RFP that we sent out last year, and that will be going out again, did not dictate whether it be a full-service restaurant or a concession. It left that up to the individuals submitting a proposal. Because we only got the one proposal, that is the direction that we went. If we were to have received, or if we do receive other proposals in this next go-around that are more of a concession style, those would be considered. So we didn't really dictate what the form would be in the RFP, and that left it open to whatever individual or company thought that they could make a go of it.
Okay, if I may continue. Sure. And Jeff, would it make sense, do you think, to have a questionnaire prepared that would go out to those golf associations, to the people who utilize the golf course? And granted, we had a restaurant that could be utilized by anybody, be they a golfer or not, and based on where it's located, I would imagine that would continue, that if it were some sort of a food establishment, that the general public could utilize it as well. But by and large, the biggest part of that utilization, I think, would be from golfers and people who utilize the golf course. So it goes without saying that if the golfers don't support it, then it doesn't get supported. So if we're seeking golfer support, I'm just wondering if we gave them a say through some sort of questionnaire process, it might help us to take a direction that serves them and their desires, so that then there's no excuse not for them to partake of the services that are given there and keep this thing afloat.
Right. The golf associations were involved in the development of the RFP of this last one. And their input was solicited and used in coming up with the RFP that we were using for this past round, and certainly we'll take into account the comments that we heard. I think they were beneficial to us as well, and if there is a way that we can tweak that RFP, we'll certainly do that.
Okay, then let me just ask this way. Do you feel that you have enough information from them, enough input to go forward without asking any more questions?
Yes.
All right, then I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you your job.
Thank you, Alderman Clayton. If I can add a question for you, Mr. Bigler, is that would it not be, these type of questions be appropriate for the vendor or the concessionaire or whoever is running it to make a survey, to have them do the survey instead of our city staff doing that?
Well, when these proposals are reviewed and prospective concessionaires are interviewed, the information will come out at that time through their submittal process as to what direction they're going to go with the menus that they're going to recommend. So yes, those questions will come up at some point during the RFP process or the interview process.
Thank you. And then, as you know, I'm probably the only one that's ever voted no on the contracting this out. So if the opportunity comes up again for an RFP, and if we can have a viable alternative looking in-house as well, I'd be certainly willing to take that into consideration too, in part of my future votes. But anyway, that's an opinion for another time. Thank you. It's not seeing any other lights. Is there any further motion needs to be made? We did vote on that, right? We did vote on that? We didn't vote. We had a haven't voted. Okay, just making sure. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Thank you. Motion by Alderwoman Scott to adjourn, second by Alderman Estes. Everyone seconded. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Thank you. Meeting adjourned.